Tonight, massacre at the mall. A gunman opens fire on holiday shoppers in Omaha. We'll have the very latest. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, a break for Americans in danger of losing their homes to foreclosure. Lenders agree to freeze the interest rates on some subprime mortgages. And 10 candidates, 10 questions. What is the biggest mistake you've ever made? Getting to the heart of those running for president in our special series, Primary Questions.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. It's the last thing anyone would expect this time of year. In the last place, in the middle of this holiday season, a gunman opened fire on shoppers at a mall in Omaha, Nebraska. Police say he killed at least 8 people and wounded several others before taking his own life. Michelle Bandur of our CBS Omaha affiliate KMTV has the very latest on this developing story.
At first, people at the busy Omaha Mall couldn't believe what they heard.
I heard something. I had no idea that it was gunshots.
So many shots so fast that by the time police arrived, only 6 minutes after the call, it was too late.
We have confirmed 9 people that have been have died from their injuries.
At least 5 others were wounded, 2 critically. Early reports focused on the Von Maur department store, where the majority of the victims, including the gunman, dead from an apparent self-inflicted wound, were found. Frightened shoppers and employees huddled wherever they could, searching for safe shelter while SWAT teams searched the 3-level 135-store mall.
So we dove behind the cosmetic counter and then crawled in with some other people into the stockroom and barricaded ourselves in and got a cell phone signal and waited for the police to get us out.
They got you out?
They came, yes, and got us out.
How'd they get you out?
They got us out with guns drawn, and I wasn't going to open the door until I saw them, and they made sure our hands were up, and then they had us run out with our hands up and got us to safety.
A local sheriff's captain confirmed that right after the shooting, a woman walked into the local sheriff's department and handed investigators what they believe was a suicide note from the gunman. Katie?
And Michelle, do police believe he was targeting anyone specifically, or that this was simply a random act of violence?
Well, witnesses tell us that they actually saw the gunman on the 3rd level of the store, shooting down at the victims on the 2nd floor who were ducking for cover, running for their lives. Katie?
Michelle Bandur. Michelle, thank you very much. Now to another breaking story. The official announcement will come tomorrow, but word got out today that relief is on the way for some Americans who risk losing their homes when the interest rate on their subprime mortgages goes up. That's nearly 2 million mortgages over the next 2 years. But now lenders have agreed to freeze the rates on some of those mortgages, at least temporarily. Anthony Mason has details.
Come on, Shugs.
Texas homeowners Jerry and Mary Davis hope the administration's mortgage rescue plan will help them.
It will help stop the bleeding somewhat.
They're bleeding because the introductory rate on their adjustable rate mortgage, 6.6%, is about to jump to 9.6%. Their monthly payment will soar $475, and the Davises can't afford it.
I think ultimately we'll lose our home.
20% of all subprime mortgages made in 2005 and 2006, like the Davises, are projected to end in foreclosure. That's why tomorrow the administration will unveil its plan for a 5-year interest rate freeze for certain subprime borrowers. It would affect adjustable rate mortgages issued between January of 2005 and July of 2007. Eligible would be borrowers who can afford their introductory rates and are up to date in their payments, but are at risk of default when the rates reset and payments rise sharply.
We must reach homeowners who are struggling, reach them early, and reach them with information and with hope.
The plan could keep hundreds of thousands of homeowners out of foreclosure.
His FICO score is going to go up.
But the industry still wants to know who's going to pay.
The question right now is who is going to take the hit.
Mortgage banker Mike McHugh says if investors are the ones who ultimately absorb the cost, it may discourage them from underwriting mortgages.
This is Maddie from Continental Home Loans.
And make it harder for everyone to get loans.
This will have a repercussion and will be felt for years to come.
Of the 6.5 million subprime borrowers out there, estimates are about 12% or 750,000, Katie, could be helped by this.
All right, Anthony Mason. Anthony, thank you. In our CBS News Money Watch, some good news about the economy touched off a rally on Wall Street. The Dow Industrials gained nearly 200 after the government reported that worker productivity was up and labor costs were down. In other news tonight, flooding is still causing big problems out in the Northwest. 2 days of storms this week left at least 7 people dead in Washington and in Oregon. The floodwaters are starting to recede, but many homes remain off limits, and a 20-mile stretch of Interstate 5 is still underwater, cutting off the main artery between Portland and Seattle. And storms in the Pacific are whipping up 15-foot waves on Southern California beaches. While some hardcore surfers dove right in, they were being warned about dangerous rip currents. To presidential politics now, 34 days to New Hampshire, 29 to Iowa, and the race there takes a nasty turn as we open tonight's CBS News Campaign 08 Notebook. Hillary Clinton's campaign fired a county coordinator who forwarded emails that smear Barack Obama, suggesting he's part of a Muslim conspiracy against America. Campaign officials say the emails were unauthorized.
American hostages.
The newest ad from Republican Rudy Giuliani invokes the Iran hostage crisis when 52 Americans were held for 444 days.
The 1 hour in which they released him was the 1 hour in which Ronald Reagan was taking the oath of office as President of the United States. The best way you deal with dictators, the best way you deal with tyrants and terrorists, you stand up to them. You don't back down.
There is much more CBS News ahead, getting inside the hearts and minds of those running for president in our special series, Primary Questions, Character, Leadership, and the Candidates. Now a different perspective on the presidential campaign. Over the next several weeks, we'll show you a side of the candidates you haven't seen before as we begin a special 10-part series, Primary Questions, Character, Leadership, and the Candidates. Tonight, you'll find out about a mistake that tarnished one candidate's reputation and another that might have led to the tragic death of a 6-year-old girl. I asked the leading contenders the same questions to learn more about who they are and the experiences that have shaped their lives. Here now, the first of 10 questions. What is the biggest mistake you've ever made? How did you recognize it, and what did you do to change course?
When I was a young senator, I was angry as heck at Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms was on the floor of the Senate railing against the Americans with Disability Act, which Bob Dole was trying to pass. And the majority leader said to me, "Joe, how's it going?" I said, "You know, that Helms," and I went on and on. I said, "How could he be so heartless and he doesn't care about," and I went on about his motives. And Mike Mansfield looked at me and said, "Joe, what would you say if I told you that 4 or 5 years ago, Jesse and Dot Helms adopted a child that is in braces and wheelchair bound as their own son?" I said, "I'd feel like a jerk." He said, "Well, they did." And so I learned, don't question the other person's motive, question their judgment, take issue with their judgment, but not their motive. You don't know what their motive is.
The biggest mistake I made was believing that my personal disagreement with abortion and my view that abortion was wrong, that somehow I could accommodate my personal view that abortion was wrong with a public view that other people should be able to make up their own mind and that government wouldn't play a role. That, in my view, was a mistake. It became apparent to me when a bill reached my desk that would have created new life and destroyed it, and I simply could not sign it. It was unacceptable to me to be associated with the destruction of human life. And I recognized that. I therefore wrote an op-ed piece in the Boston papers explaining that I was wrong in the past, that I'd made a mistake. People are going to be very focused on any time an individual changes their view on an issue. But certainly people make mistakes in their life. I have. I will. I hope I keep learning from my mistakes. I'm only worried about people who make mistakes and don't admit them.
Do you have an example of people who make mistakes and can't admit them?
Absolutely, but I'm not going to tell you what they are.
The biggest mistake I ever made was being too aggressive. I was in the New Mexico legislature. I wanted to get a bill passed increasing the minimum wage, and instead of waiting and planning and talking to people, I just rammed it through, and it didn't happen. And because of that, for a year, New Mexicans didn't get an increase in the minimum wage. I went back, made another attempt, talked to people, became inclusive, didn't get aggressive, gave others credit, and I got it done.
Some time ago in my personal life, I didn't live up to my own standards there for a while. I was a single man, and looking back on it, I didn't always do the things that I ought to do. Didn't look at things the way I should have looked at them. What I did about it was try to change my life. Part of that was meeting and falling in love with my now wife, having a couple of children late in life, getting another chance to reevaluate things, and just try to be a better person.
I have to put my handling of health care among one of my biggest mistakes, because it was so personally disappointing, but it was also such a tragic loss of time for so many Americans who needed health care, and we weren't able to deliver it because, frankly, I was new to Washington, and I didn't have the experience that I now have on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. So I didn't spend the time that I should have in really listening to people in the Congress who understood how you get big change done in America. If you want to get something done, you've got to figure out a way to get people together.
The one that comes to mind right away, and that's the one in not being able to anticipate the changes that were needed in child welfare and setting up the Administration for Children's Services early enough. All of a sudden, this young girl, Alicia Izquierdo, was killed. She was killed in a brutal way. She had been in and out of the child welfare agencies. She had been on our radar screen, and I hadn't fixed it in time. And I had time to do it. I could have done it in the time that I reformed the other agencies, and I felt terrible about this. And we made a very big reform based on it, but I always felt if we had done that earlier, maybe, just maybe, we could have avoided her death and maybe some other situations like that.
When I was a teenager, because I got involved with drinking and trying drugs. I was being raised by a single mom and by my grandparents. You know, I was frustrated and didn't have role models out there that made sense. And so I engaged in a lot of destructive behavior. And I pulled out of it in my first couple of years of college because I started thinking outside of myself. I started thinking about people I met who were struggling a lot worse than I was. You know, I didn't come from a wealthy family, but it was a middle-class family, and I never had to worry about whether I had enough to eat, or I never had to worry about whether I had a roof over my head. And I remember having a conversation with somebody and them saying to me that, you know, it's not about you, it's about what you can do for other people. And something clicked in my head, and I got real serious after that.
I've made a lot of mistakes sometimes, particularly in maybe giving people too much benefit of the doubt, keeping people in positions that should have been let go. There was a case in which I had a cabinet member that just simply did not mesh. Finally ended up terminating him. He ended up suing me, suing the state. It became very ugly, very unfortunate. We ended up winning the case, but it was a long, protracted, expensive, and embarrassing situation. I think what I had to do was to learn that if you've got particularly a personnel issue, the best thing to do, deal with it as quickly as possible, suffer the loss, try to clean up as much of the mess as you can, and accept that you can't make it all right.
I mean, if I had to say one, I'd probably say voting for the war in Iraq, which was it took time for me to recognize what a serious mistake it was. And what I did about it is announce to the world that I was wrong in exactly that language. And I learned a lesson from it, which is you have to be skeptical of information that other people give you.
If there was another one that wasn't as political.
It's completely political.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
But I just wonder if there's something in your life that you did.
This one is particularly hard. I can't think of anything else.
Well, I like to say the biggest mistake was when I raised my hand after I'd been on the USS Forrestal. We had a terrible fire, and we were going back to the States, and they asked for volunteers to stay. I found out I ended up a couple of months later in a North Vietnamese prison camp, but that's a bit self-serving. Probably was when I attended a meeting with 4 other senators, with some regulators who were overseeing a guy named Charlie Keating, who was a big contributor and a big, important economic factor in my home state. I shouldn't have done it. Ended up being found guilty of poor judgment, but to be honest with you, it was worse than poor judgment because I created an impression of impropriety, and the thing I value more than anything else is my honor.
If you'd like to see and hear more of what the candidates had to say, you can go to cbsnews.com, click on CBS Evening News, and you'll find the video posted there. Tomorrow, the candidates answer yet another primary question.
Other than your family, what are you most afraid of losing?
And coming up next, a Supreme Court showdown over the legal rights of hundreds of Guantanamo terror suspects. The Supreme Court heard intense arguments today about the rights of foreign terror suspects held on the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. At issue is whether they're entitled to argue their cases in federal court. Wyatt Andrews is at the Supreme Court.
In a case that will make history, the justices are deciding if the Constitution applies even to a potential enemy during war.
Restore habeas corpus!
Hundreds of Guantanamo detainees are arguing for the right to habeas corpus, the right to challenge their detentions in federal court, which they've been denied for 6 years. But in the often contentious arguments, Justice Scalia, sounding incredulous, demanded when in history habeas got extended to foreigners.
Do you have a single case in the 220 years of our country in which habeas was granted to an alien?
The administration argues that Congress has twice denied the prisoners direct access to federal courts, deciding instead that during wartime, military tribunals are enough.
Congress here has spoken. They've given these detainees better rights and access to administrative and judicial review.
But this is where Justice Breyer turned incredulous, asserting that nowhere in that process can a detainee challenge his captivity.
So I'm asking you, where can you make that argument?
I'm not sure that he can make that argument,
Exactly.
Justice Breyer. I'm not sure he can
make that argument. How does this become an equivalent to habeas?
Over 6 years, there has been evidence that many detainees were held on weak or arbitrary charges. Abdullah Kamal of Kuwait was held at Guantanamo for 5 years, partly on the charge that his Casio watch was the same kind favored by Al-Qaeda.
Until now, I don't know why they take 5 years from my life without any reason.
This is why lawyers for the prisoners say American values are on trial in this case. The president has asserted he controls the fate of these prisoners. Congress has passed 2 laws telling the federal courts to lay off Guantanamo. So just by taking this case, the Supreme Court is confronting, some would even say defying, both the president and Congress. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News at the Supreme Court.
Also from Washington, chilling news for anyone who flies. Congressional investigators said today there's a high risk of a catastrophic collision on an airport runway in this country. So-called runway incursions are on the increase, 370 of them in the past year. The report blames the FAA for not updating its runway safety plan and for overworking air traffic controllers. Coming up next, where did the time go? The world's most famous polar bear, no longer quite so cute or cuddly. Finally tonight, the story of a child star who's growing up, really growing. Richard Roth reports on a birthday celebration in Berlin today for Canute the polar bear.
He is still the darling of the Berlin Zoo, and when keepers brought out a fish cake for his first birthday party, there was live TV and a crowd of 2,000.
Happy birthday!
There was also a twinge of nostalgia for what time has so quickly taken away. Cute little Knut was the polar bear cub abandoned by his mother and raised by his keeper, the cuddly powder puff whose rescue by humans, some critics claimed, was a violation of nature's laws. He melted hearts, though, even as his loyal keeper found playtime increasingly hazardous. The summertime romps in the pool became history as little Knut grew from irresistible to barely manageable. He's still big box office, but at more than 200 pounds now, he's becoming too big, it's feared, for Berlin, where officials say it's time to consider moving him to a larger zoo and finding him a mate. It had to happen. Knut's growing up, even if the thought of that's unbearable. Richard Roth, CBS News, London.
He was so cute. That's the CBS Evening News. I'm Katie Couric. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, click on CBSNews.com.